Storydoor presents The Sapphire Sword by Robert L. Fuller. Chapter 2. At 9:30 that evening, their bellies full of deep-dish pepperoni pizza, the three children clustered around their father as he worked to calibrate his new telescope in the front yard. It was a cloudless night, full moon, and with the help of good, clean New Mexican air, they hardly needed a telescope to see all the wonders of heaven. "What a night," Dad breathed. "Would you just look at that moon?" He was an astronomer, their father, a student of the stars, hence the telescope and their nightly lessons on constellations. "Can I get the first look?" Slugger asked, elbowing past Flint. "Well," Dad answered, "that depends." "On what?" Scout asked, standing on her tiptoes to watch him turn dials and push buttons. The man stood straight up, hands on the small of his back, and slowly twisted left, then right, cracking his joints with a wince. "I suppose it depends on which one of you darling offspring can explain what you were doing so close to the quarry." All three children stared back in guilty silence. He continued, "Because I seem to recall, and forgive me if I'm mistaken here, that I told all of you not to go there." "It was Slugger's idea," Scout blurted, pointing quickly toward her older brother. "Thanks a lot, traitor," Slugger mumbled. "Well, it's true." Their father looked at his eldest son, who stood with an impressive poker face, then over to Flint. "What say you?" Flint sucked in a breath of air, held it in his lungs a moment, then slowly breathed out through his half-congested sinuses. "It was Slugger's idea, but we all went." "Just to the edge," Slugger said. "We aren't stupid." "I didn't say you were stupid," Dad returned. "Foolish, yes, but stupid, hardly." Silence fell again as their father allowed the weight of the moment to build. The only sound was the evening symphony of insects. Finally, he spoke. "Well now," the man looked them over with evident satisfaction. "I take it this won't happen again?" "Yes, sir," Slugger said quickly. No, sir. You know what I mean, sir." Dad nodded, turned to the other two. "We won't go there again, we promise," Scout said, wrapping her arms around his waist and looking up into his eyes, "even if it means we never taste those delicious cherries the rest of our lives." The man chuckled, hugged her back. "Sorry we disobeyed you," Flint said. "Nah, don't carry it too hard," Dad grinned, tussling the boy's shaggy blonde hair. "These mountain cherries are hard to pass up." He turned to all of them. "Tell you what, I'll take you there next time myself. How about that?" They all agreed with relieved delight. When their father returned his attention to the telescope, Flint ventured a question. "Hey, Dad?" "Yes?" "Are you scared to let us go to the quarry because we can't swim and you think we'll drown if we fall in?" The man didn't look up, kept right on peering through the eyepiece. He cleared his throat. "Flint, the quarry would be dangerous even if you swam like an Olympiad." "Oh," Flint said, stared at the ground, then looked up. "And why did you never teach us to swim? Are we really going to talk about this again?" He shot him a quick glance. Flint shrugged his shoulders. "I'd kind of like to know too," Slugger said, "now that he mentions it." "Do you now?" Dad said. They were getting his attention, though he still hadn't looked up. Flint continued. "We know you've tried to explain before that it takes time to learn properly, that we don't have a pool and not much chance to swim anyway." Slugger was catching on. "And you don't like the pool in town because you think it's swimming with microbes and baby dump." "Sick!" Scout grimaced. "And yet," Flint narrowed his eyes, "it doesn't match up at all with the other things you let us do. You taught us how to build a fire from scratch, how to shoot, skin, cook, and eat a squirrel." Slugger snapped his fingers and pointed right at his father. "And you let us explore on our own for hours and hours when none of our friends get to do that. You taught us knife throwing, axe throwing. Don't forget archery," Scout chirped. Flint was getting more and more convinced of his case. "All these things you do for us, and all the ways you trust us, and yet you've refused to teach us to swim." He tilted his head. "Why?" Their father was standing straight again, looking at each of them in turn. He wasn't the kind of dad who refused a rebuke when a rebuke was due, even from his own children. He pursed his lips, clenched his jaw. Okay, I admit, I'm paranoid. I had a bad experience as a kid, and I've been putting off the whole swimming thing. This is on me, and I'm sorry. They all stood in stunned silence. They'd never so much as heard a single negative thing from their father's childhood. He rarely, if ever, spoke of his childhood at all, claiming selective dementia on the topic. Before any of them could offer a response, however, he offered his own. "Look, I'll make a deal with you," he said. "If you don't bludgeon me with an inquisition on what happened, I promise to teach you to swim, and soon." "Really?" they all shouted back, beaming. The man stifled a laugh and shook his head. "All in due time, kiddos, all in due time. Now, Scout, why don't you go check on the dog?" Scout lit up even more. "On it!" She darted away toward the garage, where Robin Hood rested in a towel-padded cardboard box. He seemed not to have moved an inch since she'd placed him there, hadn't touched the bowl of water or plate of chopped-up summer sausage either. She rested her chin on the lip of the box. "You okay there, Robin Hood? You hungry?" No response. Not even a single quiver of its tail. Most of the smell was gone by now, since they'd scrubbed the dog with a whole bottle of dish detergent. So at least the rotting stench was not from the dog itself. So why was it still sleeping? She stood up with a sigh and ambled thoughtfully back outside, where the boys were taking turns gazing at the sea of tranquility through the telescope. Upon Scout's return, her father rubbed the 2-day stubble on his chin like he always did when he was pondering. "So, Scout," he said, "I've been wondering about these smelly, thorny vines of yours." "I wouldn't call them mine, Daddy." "Well, either way, they remind me of something. A type of exotic flower called a death orchid." "A flower? Like the ones Mommy liked?" she said with a grin. No," her father snickered. "The death orchid actually simulates the odor of decay. It draws flies in for pollination instead of bees." "Wow," she grimaced. "That sounds interesting and disgusting at the same time." He kept on thinking out loud. "But for this vine, it doesn't make sense, unless the stench is a defense mechanism. Do you say you actually saw a liquid dripping from the stalk?" "Yes, sir," Scout said, then eyed her brothers as they gazed into the telescope. Celestial glory had suddenly become more interesting than stinky vine slime. "You know, Scout," he said, "I think I want to get a look at 'em. Let's go back and check 'em out after school tomorrow." "Sure," she said distractedly, moving closer to the telescope. "I want to see," she declared. Slugger and Flint graciously stepped aside as she peered through the eyepiece, seeing a gray and white landscape of such detail she could almost count the rocks. "Wow," she marveled. "I wish I could go there someday." Slugger snorted. "No one goes to the moon anymore, and even if they did, you have to be like the smartest person on the planet to even get a try. That is, if your spaceship doesn't blow up like Apollo 13 and you suffocate and freeze to death." "Party pooper," Scout said, without pulling away from the telescope. "Dream crusher." "Reality checker, actually," Flint said. Slugger grinned. "Just trying to keep your feet on the ground, Sugar Plum." "Don't call me that." "Sure thing, Squirt." "Enough, kids," Dad said. "We've got bigger and farther things to look at than the moon." The sound in his voice had them immediately transfixed. They'd heard that tone before, and it always preceded amazement. For the next several minutes, they took turns studying close-ups of Mars, Venus, Jupiter, even Saturn with its rings. He asked them probing questions along the way about planet types and names and various atmospheres. The first barrage of trivia was easily conquered by all three, but inevitably he always managed to delve deep enough into his knowledge to stump them, though their attention was no less rapt. "So," he said, pivoting the telescope to a new spot in the sky, "how big do you think our solar system is?" "It's big," Slugger offered. "Indeed," the man conceded. "But how big?" "Like mega big," the eldest child added. "Millions and millions of miles at least," Flint said, "if it's 93 million miles from the Earth to the Sun." Slugger rolled his eyes. "Okay, Dorkmeister." "Neanderthal," Flint shot back. "Boys," their father interrupted, "please refrain from ridicule and answer my question." "We don't know, Daddy," Scout said. "Okay, I'll tell you," the man said, drawing in a deep breath before belting out the answer. 113,460,000,000 miles from one end to the other, give or take a few million miles or so. "Geez," Flint said, looking straight up into the sky. "That's massive." "You don't know the half of it," their father said, still gazing into the telescope. "This massive solar system you describe is just a dot, a tiny little grain of sand on a great cosmic ocean floor." Let me guess, Slugger began. This ocean you describe is the Milky Way? Exactly. And do you know how many stars are in the Milky Way? Lots, Slugger asked. Try billions and billions and billions. Current estimation places the number somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars. Wow, Scout said. That's like a lot. Dad glanced up from the eyepiece and winked at his daughter. And how big is the Milky Way? Flynn asked, eyes still fixed overhead. Well, their father answered, you have to think in much, much bigger scale. It's about 100,000 light years across. That's how far light can travel in a year, right? Scout said. That's exactly right, the man answered. And a light year is approximately 5.88 trillion miles. So let's just say our galaxy is a very large thing. That's a lot of candy bar, Slugger said, licking his lips. I'm hungry. Can I have a snack? Later, their father said. We're just getting to the good part here. Where was I? Oh yeah. Okay, so it was once thought our galaxy was all there was. That all the stars you see right now are in the Milky Way. That was the general scientific assumption. Not until about 100 years ago did they discover anything different. What happened? Flynn asked. They got bigger and bigger telescopes and looked farther and farther away and realized in a moment that some of the stars they were looking at were actually other galaxies. Do you know what that means? Slugger, Flint, and Scout didn't answer. Children, he said, gazing up in wide-eyed wonder. Think about it. In that single moment of observation, our gargantuan galaxy itself became another grain of sand in an even grander ocean. Say there's billions and billions of stars in the Milky Way. Well, we now know there are billions and billions of galaxies in the observable universe, 100 billion even. He now stood straight up, flinging his muscled arms wide from horizon to horizon, his voice radiant with reverent awe. The entire known universe is said to be 27.4 billion light years across, a size almost beyond imagination. Countless stars, seemingly infinite planets, and so many moons you'd never be able to count them if you lived for 1,000,000 years. The three siblings looked up just as their father did. They tried to comprehend his words, the scale and beauty of the universe and such, but it all just seemed so big their minds couldn't grasp it, like an ant trying to understand the earth. And then Scout, in perfect Scout form, asked a question her brothers often thought but had not the courage to ask. Daddy, do you think Mama is looking down on us right now? Their father stiffened as if jolted by the words, then slowly relaxed. His answer came quietly. I sure hope so, sweetheart. I surely do hope so. Moments later, when he finally looked down from the sky, they could see lines of tears reflecting in the moonlight on his cheeks. He dried them with the back of his sleeve. All right, kids, time for bed. It was pitch black when Scout's eyes flew open. She blinked up into darkness. Something was wrong. She held her breath and listened. Dad snored in the master bedroom down the hall. Nothing odd about that. He peppered every night with his guttural vibrations. The sound of simulated cricket song emanated from the boys' room. Again, totally normal. They used their nature sound machine every night. It made them feel like they were camping. Scout had considered letting loose a swarm of mosquitoes under their door to augment the effect, but had never figured out how to catch enough. So what had awakened her? There it was, a low humming sound, a kind of electrical tone rising up through the floor. She knew every appliance in the house emitted a certain tone. Flint told her that. But this one was different, deeper, louder, tickling the skin. She climbed out of bed in her flannel pajamas and tiptoed downstairs. There was nothing in the kitchen that made the sound, nor the living room, laundry room, bathroom, not even on the driveway outside when she looked out the window. And then she thought of the garage. Scout slowly opened the door and was met at once by a wall of sound, like a current passing through every cell of her body. It seemed to almost lift her off the ground. Whoa, she said, stepping back. Then she noticed the light, deep blue, like an early night sky shining from inside Robin Hood's box. With heart racing, Scout inched her way forward. The closer she got, the louder the sound. When she stood within 5 feet of the box, she thought she heard a kind of beeping, rapid, in a pattern like faint Morse code. She narrowed her eyes and tried to recognize a letter. "Scout!" Someone switched on the overhead light. Instantly, the blue light disappeared, along with the beeping and the hum. She cried out and dashed forward to look into the box. Robin Hood lay still as stone. "Scout, what is it?" Dad was at her side in an instant. He looked down at the dog. "What happened?" She tried to explain, but ended up sounding ridiculous. Her father tilted his head in confusion. "I didn't hear anything," he said. Scout had to bite her lip to keep from crying. "I wouldn't lie," she insisted. "I didn't say you lied, but sleep can do a number on perceptions no matter who you are. Maybe you imagined it." "No," she demanded. "I didn't. It was real." He draped an arm around her shoulder and gently led her toward the door. "Come back to bed, sweetheart. You don't even want to know what time it is." Dejected, she complied and followed him back upstairs, insisting all the while what she saw and heard was real. He tucked her in bed, kissed her on the head, and switched off the light. "Sweet dreams, kiddo." She turned on her side and said nothing as he softly closed the door. In the ensuing silence, all she could think about was the sound and the light and the dog. What in the world was going on? Far too stirred up for slumber, she eventually threw her covers aside and trudged to her bedroom window. She looked out into the front yard, which was bathed in silver moonlight. She lifted a hand and pressed it against the cool glass. "You would have believed me, Mama," she whispered. "You would have believed everything." Stay tuned for Chapter 3, coming soon on Storydoor. This is Robert Fuller, the author and creator of the Sapphire Sword, and I just want to offer my heartfelt thanks for you tuning in and giving this a listen. I am so excited to bring you along on this adventure that awaits our characters, Slugger, Flint, and Scout. Please do us an enormous favor and subscribe, leave us a review, and help spread the word about the Storydoor podcast and the Sapphire Sword. Until next time.